My name is Fonda Avery. I'm 29 years old, and 12 years ago, my parents packed my whole life into one plastic tote and set it on the front porch because I got a job. I was 17. I came home after dark from a Sunday shift at a nursing home, smelling like gravy and hand sanitizer, and my key wouldn't turn because my mom had changed the locks that afternoon. What my parents told the rest of my family about that night was worse than what they actually did. And what they did the following spring, when their brand new babysitter quit on them without notice, that's the part people never believe. But here's what none of them knew about me. I keep receipts. Not the paper kind. The kind you set down, real quiet, on your grandmother's Thanksgiving tablecloth. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where quiet people finally get to tell the truth about the families that underestimated them. If you've ever been the one who held everything together while everybody around you called it nothing, this story is yours too. Drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this one ends. Let me show you a Tuesday from my senior year, because you can't understand the tote until you understand the Tuesdays. My alarm went off at 5:50. 3 lunch boxes on the counter by 6:15. Turkey for Cody, who was 9 and would trade anything with bread on it. No strawberries for Bess, who was 7 and allergic to half the produce aisle. Sam's inhaler zipped into the front pocket of his dinosaur backpack, because Sam was 4 and thought inhalers were toys. I braided Bess's hair while my mom's coffee went cold on the microwave. My mom, Denise, ran a shift supervisor's schedule at the Ridgemont distribution warehouse, 2 to 10 most nights, rotating weekends. My dad, Ray, drove regional routes and came home on Fridays smelling like diesel and gas station coffee. So the pickup line at 3:40 was me, homework was me, dinner was me, bath time was me, the permission slips and the fever nights, and the tooth fairy were me. I could run a household of 6 on $40 and a coupon app. I was 17. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because for 9 years, nobody in that house ever said the word for what I was. They just called it helping. Then one afternoon in September, in the waiting room of Sam's pediatrician, I saw a flyer pinned to the corkboard. Crestwood Senior Center, weekend dietary aid, $8.50 an hour, must be 16 or older. I stood there reading it while Sam drove a toy truck up my leg. Then I took a picture of that flyer with my phone. And I swear to you, it felt like shoplifting. Here's what nobody at my kitchen table knew. I had a 3.9 GPA that I maintained in the pickup line, and after the last bath was drained. And under my mattress, I kept a folder full of printouts about a scholarship called Beacon Health Scholars. Full ride, tuition, housing, books, everything, for students going into nursing. I'd wanted nursing since I was 12, since the school nurse let me sit in her office and organize the ice packs while I waited out a fever, because nobody could leave work to come get me. Some kids doodle wedding dresses. I doodled IV schedules. But Beacon had requirements, and they were printed in a font that didn't care about my feelings. Applicants must be currently employed or volunteering in a licensed care setting. Applicants must document 200 verifiable service hours by May 1st. Verifiable. I want you to sit with that word the way I did. I had 9 years of hours. I could dose children's Tylenol by weight without looking at the box. I could spot a fake fever from the doorway. And none of it counted because family doesn't sign timesheets. The flyer from Crestwood was still on my phone, and Crestwood was a licensed care setting, and weekend shifts wouldn't touch a single school day pickup. It fit. It fit so perfectly it scared me. There was just one lock on the door, and it was legal, not emotional. In Ohio, a 17-year-old needs a work permit, and a work permit needs a parent's signature. My mom would say no before I finished the sentence, which left my dad, who was home only on weekends, and who hated conflict the way cats hate rain. I knew exactly which parent to ask. I just had to pick my moment, and pray he'd finally pick his. I want this part on the record, because of what my family said about me later. I did not blow up my household to chase a paycheck. I built a plan first, the way you'd build a bridge. I mapped out Saturday and Sunday morning shifts only, 7 to 1, home before anybody had time to miss me. I spent one whole week batch cooking after the kids went down, and I stacked 6 labeled freezer meals like bricks. Enough dinners to cover any weekend my mom got called in. I wrote the kids' schedules on index cards, allergy lists, the pediatrician's number, Sam's inhaler routine, step by step, in handwriting a stranger could follow. Remember those cards, because they come back at the end of this story. Then Friday night, after my mom left for her shift and the kids were asleep, I sat down across from my dad and slid the work permit over the table like a peace treaty. I had the flyer, I had the shift schedule, I had the freezer inventory, alphabetized. He read it all twice, and I watched his eyes do the thing they did whenever a decision couldn't be outrun. Then he signed it, fast, like the paper was hot. "Don't tell your mother I signed that," he said. "Let me pick the moment." I said, "Okay." I was 17, and I still believed there was a version of my dad who picked moments. Here's the thing about my dad that took me years to forgive. He always knew what was right. He just wanted somebody else to be holding it when it went off. He never picked the moment. The moment got picked for all of us, 2 weeks later, by a pay stub that slipped out of my jacket pocket in the laundry room. My mom didn't yell when she found the pay stub. Yelling would have meant something had surprised her, and Denise Avery did not permit surprises on her shift. She waited until Friday, when my dad was home, and she called a family meeting at the kitchen table, which in our house meant a performance review. She set the pay stub down between us, smoothed flat, like evidence. Then she laid out her case, calm as a forklift. "This family is a team. Teams don't clock out. Everybody contributes what they're best at, and what you're best at is the kids." She said my Crestwood money was selfish money, that I'd gone behind her back, that wiping strangers' tables while my own brothers and sister ate freezer food was a slap in her face. I brought out my index cards and my shift map. I showed her the 6 dinners, stacked and labeled. I told her the job was weekend mornings only, that nothing on the school week schedule would change, that I had planned it down to the bus times. She listened the way a wall listens. Then she said the one honest thing anybody said that whole autumn. "This isn't about the schedule, Fonda." She was right. It wasn't about the schedule. It was about whose life my life belonged to, and we both knew it, and neither of us said it out loud. My dad peeled the label off his root beer bottle in one long strip and said nothing at all about the signature at the bottom of my work permit. The meeting ended without a verdict, which I mistook for a ceasefire. Saturday morning, I got up in the dark and biked to my first shift, and when I looked back from the corner, my mom was standing at the front window with her arms crossed, watching me go. The next 2 weeks, my house went cold in a way a thermostat can't fix. My mom stopped speaking to me directly. Instructions arrived through Cody, who was 9 and hated being a switchboard. "Tell your sister we're out of milk. Tell your sister Sam needs his forms." And then the schedule started slipping, and I still can't prove it was a strategy, which is exactly what made it a good one. Twice in 14 days, my mom came home late on my shift mornings. No call, no text. Twice I stood in the driveway doing math with a 4-year-old on my hip, because I couldn't leave 3 kids alone and she knew it. Twice I clocked in late at Crestwood. My supervisor, Yolanda, was fair, the way steel is fair. She marked me tardy both times and told me the third one starts the paperwork, honey. At dinner, the silence had a texture to it, like walking through a freezer aisle. Bess started whispering at the table. Sam did not, because 4-year-olds are born without a volume knob, and one night he asked, loud, why Mommy was mad at Fonda. Nobody answered him, so I did. I said, Mommy's not mad. She's tired. My mom set down her fork, and for 1 second I thought we might finally have it out. The real conversation, the one about whose hours counted. Instead, she looked at me the way you look at freight that's been stacked on the wrong pallet, and she said it, quiet and level, like a fact of nature. The oldest carries. That's how it's always been. That sentence didn't sound like her. It sounded older than her, worn smooth, like something recited. I didn't know yet whose voice she was borrowing. I'd find out at a lunch table in November, and it would crack the whole story open. The first week of October, my mom came home with news and a clipboard voice. Ridgemont had offered her permanent night lead. More money, steady overnights, a title she'd been chasing for 6 years. She announced it at dinner like a done deal, and then she turned to me and laid out my half of her promotion. She'd need me home every evening now, 5 to midnight, weekends floating. Crestwood was over. I could give notice Sunday. And I want you to understand, I did not throw my fork and scream that it was unfair. I was ready. I'd been ready for weeks. I told her, out loud, in front of my dad and the mashed potatoes, the thing I'd never said in that kitchen: I'm applying for a nursing scholarship. Full ride. It requires a care job and it requires hours, and if I quit Crestwood, I lose it. And I'm not quitting. You'd have thought I'd announced I was joining the circus. My mom actually laughed, one short syllable with no joy in it. Nursing school. On whose gas money? Then the laugh dropped off her face, and what was underneath it wasn't anger. It was arithmetic. She was looking at a 17-year-old line item that had just tried to remove itself from her budget. Quit by Sunday, she said, or find somewhere else to sleep. My dad called me the next morning from a truck stop outside Dayton, and I stood in the school parking lot with the phone against my ear, waiting for him to be my father. Just do what your mother says for now, he said. For now. A little hinge of a phrase, doing the work that man never would. That Sunday I worked my full shift anyway, then stayed through dinner service to cover for an aide who'd called in sick, and biked home after dark through an October drizzle, rehearsing a speech I never got to give. You never forget what your whole life looks like when it fits in one gray plastic tote. October 9th. I turned onto our street a little after 7, soaked through, and the porch light was already on, which was wrong, and there was a shape on the welcome mat, which was wrong too. My clothes, folded. My school books. My folder of scholarship printouts, rubber banded. My winter coat laid on top, folded square. Like a courtesy. Like a hotel checkout. I tried my key, and it went in half an inch and stopped, and I stood there jiggling it for a stupid amount of time, the way you do when your hands understand before you do. Then I saw Cody at the front window, 9 years old, both palms on the glass, crying so hard his shoulders shook, and a hand pulled him back, and the curtain swung shut. That's the picture I still get at 2 in the morning sometimes. Not the tote. My little brother, being removed from the window like a decoration. I stood on that porch for 40 minutes in the rain. I knocked. I heard the TV go on inside, cartoon voices, volume up. And then I did something I didn't fully understand yet, something that would matter more than anything else I did that year. I took out my phone and I photographed the tote, sitting on the mat under the porch light, timestamp and all, because some cold, clear voice in the back of my head said, "Someday, somebody is going to ask." Then I texted my dad. He was 200 miles away, but he answered fast, like he'd been holding the phone. "You did this to yourself. Don't come back until you remember what family means." I read it maybe 30 times. Then I strapped the tote to my bike rack and rode 15 minutes across town, water in my shoes, to the only address I had left. My Aunt Carol opened the door of her upholstery shop with a staple gun still in her hand, looked at me, looked at the tote, and didn't ask one single question. "Get inside," she said. "You're staying." Carol's apartment sat over her shop, second seam upholstery, and the whole place smelled like fabric glue and coffee, which to this day is what safety smells like to me. She fed me grilled cheese, put sheets on the couch, and didn't make me talk. But here's what I did that first night, and I want you to notice it, because it took me years to see it clearly. By 9 that night, my hand had started patting the couch cushion next to me, all on its own, feeling for Sam's inhaler. It wasn't there. It was 15 minutes away, in a house I couldn't get into. So instead of sleeping, I sat up and made a list on the back of a fabric invoice, titled, "Things Nobody Will Do Now." Bess's braid, Cody's reading log, the pediatrician number, taped inside the cabinet. Sam's bedtime steps, in order, because order was the whole trick of it. And somewhere around midnight I stood up, put my wet shoes back on, and announced I had to go back, tonight, because they needed me. Listen to that sentence. I'd been on the porch 4 hours ago in the rain, locked out like a stray, and my first instinct was to go back and finish bath time protocols. Carol blocked the staircase with one arm, pointed me back at the couch, and picked up the phone. And I lay there listening to half a fight come up through the floorboards, my aunt's voice low and then not low at all. She is 17, Denise. The other half of that call I never heard, and probably that's a mercy. In the morning, there were pancakes and a towel folded on the radiator for me, and I was buttering the third pancake before I noticed I'd made it through a whole breakfast without cutting up anyone's food but mine. Monday morning, homeroom hadn't even finished attendance when the intercom crackled and called my name to the counselor's office. Mrs. Tellman had a cardigan the color of oatmeal and a voice built for bad news. She'd heard from a teacher who'd heard from Cody's school, because towns like Harlow Falls only look big. She asked me where I'd slept Friday night, and I said my aunt's, and she asked why. And I gave her some soft-boiled version where nobody was to blame, and she just waited, the way professionals wait, until the true shape of it came out of my mouth. Then she said words I'd never once applied to myself. Unaccompanied youth. Abandonment. She said, Fonda, I'm what's called a mandated reporter. I don't get a choice about this part. Neither do you. And I want you to know what I did with that. Because it tells you everything about who I was at 17. I begged her not to make it a big deal. I defended them. I said my mom was exhausted, that my dad was on the road, that it was really a misunderstanding about a job. I sat in a counselor's office, homeless by federal definition, negotiating on behalf of the people who changed the locks. That's what 9 years of carrying does to you. It teaches you to protect the weight. That same afternoon, I asked Carol if I could move my stuff down to the shop's storage room and sleep there instead of taking up her living room, so I'd be less of a bother. Carol didn't look up from the wingback chair she was stretching fabric over. She put 2 more staples in. Pop, pop. And then she said, without any drama at all, the sentence that ended up carved over the door of my whole adult life. You are allowed to cost something. I didn't answer. She stapled again and added, quieter. Your mother never learned that. I watched her not learn it. I wanted to ask what that meant, but her face had closed like a shop at 9. Before I tell you what my mother did at that school meeting, if you were the kid who packed the lunches and signed the permission slips, tell me in the comments how old you were when you started. I've read 1,000 of these stories now. And nobody ever says 18. And subscribe if you're staying with me, because what my mom did next took a kind of nerve I still can't explain. The meeting happened Thursday, in a conference room with motivational posters and a box of tissues nobody touched. My parents came dressed for church, and I watched my mother give the performance of her life. She was warm. She was weary. She was a hard-working mom of 4 whose oldest had hit a rebellious patch, some boy nobody approved of, a job she'd taken behind their backs, teenage drama, you know how girls get. She said the locks got changed for security reasons and the timing was unfortunate. She said the tote was me being dramatic, that I'd packed it myself. I sat 3 feet away while my own story was recut and dubbed in front of me. And here's the thing that scared me most. She wasn't lying the way nervous people lie. She was believing it as she went. Mrs. Tellman listened with a legal pad and a level face, and then she explained, gently, what a neglect report looks like once it's filed, how it follows a family around. The temperature in the room changed, and my parents, who would not give me a bed, could not sign fast enough to give me away. A caregiver authorization, naming Carol. Written consent for me to reside with her, enroll from her address, the whole packet. My dad signed without looking at me, and his hand was shaking, and I remember thinking, that's the most honest thing anyone's done in this room. Here's the twist I didn't appreciate until later. That signature, the one they signed to dodge an investigation, was the paper that set me free. Out of their house, out of their reach, and legally parked with the one adult in the family who was on my side. On the way out, my mom passed close to me in the hallway, and she said it almost tenderly, like a weather forecast. You'll be back by Christmas. Here's what nobody tells you about getting thrown away. Some mornings, it feels like getting handed back. My new life ran on a rhythm I'd never had before. Mornings helping Carol haul fabric bolts before school, afternoons at Crestwood, nights doing homework at her Formica table with actual silence around it. I taped my first full pay stub to the bathroom mirror, not for the amount, which was almost funny, but because it had my name printed on work that the world admitted was work. That's a thing your family can take from you without ever raising a voice. The receipt. And then, there was Mrs. Aldrich. 89 years old, room 14, sharp as a tack, and mean at cards. She flagged me down my second weekend because I was the only aide who didn't talk to her like a toddler, and she taught me cribbage. And then she beat me at cribbage 3 games straight and cackled like a heat vent. While she was pegging her points, she asked why a girl my age was serving soup on Saturdays, and I gave her the short version. She didn't do the sad face people do. She just squared up the deck, tapped it once, and said, "At my age, you learn to count only the love that doesn't send a bill." Then she dealt me another losing hand. I wrote that sentence in the back of my chemistry notebook on the bus home. I didn't fully understand it yet. I just knew it was the exact opposite of every sentence in my mother's kitchen, and that both sentences could not be true at the same time. That night, my phone buzzed, and it was the family group chat. 19 people, aunts and uncles and cousins, the one named Avery Hutchins Fam with the turkey emoji. I opened it to a gray banner. I'd been removed from the group. You want to know how I found out what my parents were telling people? A 13-year-old with no filter. My cousin Danny texted me on a Tuesday night, spelling and all. Is it true? Mom said you stole money from Aunt Denise and ran off with some guy. I sat on Carol's couch and read that text until the screen dimmed. Stole money. Ran off with a guy. There was no guy. There was a nursing home and a cribbage board and a couch that smelled like fabric glue. But a story like mine, the true one, is complicated, and complicated loses to simple every single time at family speed. Simple had already lapped the whole state. My Aunt Marie switched checkout lanes at the grocery store when Carol and I walked in. My Uncle Pete's Christmas card list dropped me off it like a typo. 19 people in a group chat, and not one of them called the 17-year-old to ask her version. I know, because I checked my call log like a crazy person for a month. And here is where I made the decision that people in the comments will argue about, and that's fine. I drafted 11 different replies to Danny that night. Long ones with screenshots, short ones with lawyer words I didn't own yet, a whole essay about verifiable hours. I deleted every single one, and I put the phone face down, and I finished my chemistry homework. Because you cannot outshout a story, you can only outlive it. I wasn't going to spend my senior year running a rebuttal campaign against my own mother, feeding quotes into the family gossip machine like everybody wanted. I had a different plan, and it lived in a plain manila folder that I'd just started building, and I'll tell you what was in it when it's time. What I didn't have yet was a deadline. That arrived the next week, in a thick envelope with a lighthouse on the return address. The Beacon Health Scholars packet arrived at Carol's address, because Carol's address was my address now, and we opened it at the Formica table like it was radioactive. Full tuition, housing, books, a stipend that made my Crestwood wage look like a tip jar. And then, the conditions, printed clean and merciless. 200 verifiable care hours by May 1st, employer attested. Financial disclosure from a parent or guardian or, and I read this part out loud twice, an official determination letter for unaccompanied youth. Mrs. Tellman had already filed exactly that letter. Between her letter and the papers my parents had signed to dodge a neglect report, I could apply without their signatures, their tax returns, or their permission. Nobody in that conference room had planned it, least of all them. But there it was in black and white. The door they slammed had a door inside it. And then, the last condition, the one that ran the rest of this story. Selected scholars must report to the Summer Bridge residency on June 1st. No deferrals. The cohort begins together or not at all. Carol read that line over my shoulder and she didn't give a speech. She went to the junk drawer, found a red marker that still worked on the third try, and she walked to the kitchen calendar hanging next to the fridge, the free one from Harlow Falls Savings with the covered bridge photos, and she flipped it to June and drew one thick red circle around the first, pressing hard enough to dent 3 months. Then she flipped it back and stuck a red dot on the corner of every month between now and then, like stepping stones. "There," she said. "Now it's real." From that night on, every fight left in this story, every phone call, every plea, every guilt trip dressed as an apology, all of it was really a war over 1 square inch of a bank calendar. I signed the application at 11:40 at night, and Carol notarized nothing, witnessed everything, and made cocoa. The second week of November, my grandmother summoned me to lunch. Ruth Hutchins did not invite, she summoned, and you went, because she was 68 years old and had buried a husband and raised 3 kids on a cannery paycheck and had earned the right to summon. She made pork chops and set the table with cloth napkins, for a Tuesday, for a granddaughter. Then she took my hand across the table and told me, kindly, everything my mother had installed in her, that I'd gotten secretive, that there was a boy, that my poor mother was working herself gray while I played waitress for pocket money. I told her the truth, all of it, the ultimatum, the locks, the tote in the rain. And my grandmother did something worse than calling me a liar. She nodded and she filed it, and she weighed it against the family ledger and she said, "Fonda, your mother gave up everything for this family. You couldn't give 2 years?" Then, while I was still absorbing that, she told me a story I'd never heard. "Your mother was 16 when your grandpa died," she said. "I took the night shift at the cannery because nights paid better. Denise got your Uncle Pete and your Aunt Carol up every morning, braided Carol's hair at 6 a.m., biked to the diner to wash dishes before her own classes. Never complained once, not once, and her eyes went soft and proud and mine went somewhere else entirely, because I was doing the math. 16, braids at 6 a.m., a job on a bike. She was describing my mother and she was describing me, and she had no idea she was describing either of us. The oldest carries, my grandmother said. That's how it's always been. Word for word. So that's where my mother had learned the sentence. At this exact table. Probably over these exact napkins. I'd come to lunch hoping for an ally. I left understanding I was up against something so much older than my mom that my mom had once been me, standing right where I stood before it swallowed her. "You'll come to Thanksgiving," Grandma said at the door. It wasn't a question. "We'll behave like a family." The Monday before Thanksgiving, my mother came to Crestwood. I was wheeling the dinner cart down the West Hall when I saw her through the glass of the front office, in her good coat, doing her concerned voice at Yolanda. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the shape of them. "My daughter is a minor. She's a runaway. She needs her parents' permission to work, and we do not give it." She'd come to pull the one thread she thought still hung off me, and I stood behind that cart with my heart going like a dryer full of sneakers, because if Crestwood fell, the hours fell, and if the hours fell, Beacon fell with them. Neither of us knew it yet, but Yolanda had my file open before my mom finished her first sentence. Work permit, valid, on record since September. Parent signature line, signed. Ray Avery. My father had signed me into that job back when it was still a secret, and his own name now stood between my mother and the kill switch. Yolanda slid the folder across the counter, let her read it, and then said, "The way only a woman who has run a dining room for 200 seniors can say it, ma'am. Everything here is in order, and my shift is short-staffed." She did not say get out. She said it in fluent supervisor instead. But here's the part that stuck to me for months. My mother, reading my dad's signature, did not look furious. She looked confused. Genuinely, deeply confused, like a machine fed a coordinate that doesn't exist. Her whole system said family runs on one authority, hers, benevolent and total, and the paper in her hand said otherwise, and she could not file it anywhere. For one strange second I almost felt for her. Then she buttoned her good coat and left without looking down the hall, and that night, a number I didn't know texted me. "This is Kayla? The new sitter. Can I ask you some stuff about Sam's inhaler?" So they'd hired a babysitter. Kayla, 20, community college student, in over her head by the second text. And I want to be very clear about what I did, because this is the part of me I'm still proudest of. I answered every single message. Inhaler steps, bedtime order, the strawberry thing, which nights Cody needs the hall light on even though he'll deny it. I typed up the index cards all over again, this time into a stranger's phone at 11 p.m., because my war was with my parents, and my little brothers and my sister were not enlisted in it. Bess called me some Thursdays from the school office phone, whispering like a spy, and told me there'd been a different neighbor lady every week until Kayla stuck, and that Cody got a yellow slip for shoving a kid who said something about me, and that Sam cried at bedtime some nights. And every one of those calls took a bite out of me that I didn't let anyone see. Everything in my body said, go back. That's the thing about being raised as the load-bearing wall. The house doesn't have to call you. You hear it creak from across town. But instead of going back, I started building something. A plain manila folder, the one I mentioned. Into it went the YMCA after-school program, which had sliding scale scholarships and a bus from the kids' school, and the county childcare subsidy tables with the income lines highlighted, because I knew my parents' bracket to the dollar. I'd done their coupon math for years. The application window opened in spring. I filled in what I could and flagged what I couldn't. I printed the shift swap policy from the carrier my dad drove for, the one that let regional drivers trade into home nightly routes, and I highlighted the paragraph nobody in that house had ever read. Night after night, the folder got thicker. I told myself it was just in case. I was building my family an exit ramp. I just didn't know yet who was going to have to drive them onto it. Thanksgiving was 4 days out, and Carol gave me every exit a person could be given. "We can do turkey here," she said, "just us. I'll burn the rolls and we'll call it tradition." And I thought about it. Honestly, staying home would have been self-care. It also would have been one more year of being a rumor at that table instead of a person. One more season of my mother's version growing up big and strong on second helpings while I got described in past tense. Here's what tipped me, and it wasn't rage. It was Danny's text, still sitting in my phone. Is it true? A 13-year-old had asked me a direct question, and everyone else at that table had been content with the answer they were served. Fine. Then I would go, and I would bring the answer. I want to be precise about what I planned because nuclear is the word people used about me later, and nuclear implies I wanted a crater. What I packed was one manila envelope, and inside it, 3 flat pieces of paper. A printout of my dad's text from October 9th, the one telling me not to come back until I remembered what family means, with his name and the timestamp. The photo of the tote on the porch, printed at the drugstore, $4.99 for glossy. And a copy of the school district's determination letter, the federal one, with the phrase unaccompanied youth in the first line, and my parents' names further down. No speech stapled to it. No demands. I rehearsed nothing, which for me was the whole revolution. I'd spent 9 years managing that family's logistics, and 7 weeks managing their comfort from exile, and I was done managing. I wasn't going to fight for the microphone at Ruth Hutchins's table. I was going to set the truth down on it, in writing, and let it eat. Carol watched me square the envelope's corners on the Formica table and said only one thing. "Sit near the door, kid. Here's where I stop being the quiet one in this story." If you've ever sat at a holiday table while somebody retold your own life like fiction, with the gravy going around, you know exactly how loud silence can get. Comment the kids' table if you know that feeling, and subscribe, because what I laid on my grandmother's tablecloth that Thursday split my family straight down the middle, and 5 months later it came back for my parents in a way none of us saw coming. My grandmother's dining table had a leaf for every decade of marriage she'd survived, and on Thanksgiving all of them went in, and 19 people sat down the way they'd sat down my whole life. Grandma Ruth at the head, my parents on her right, my mother radiant in hostess mode, ferrying green bean casserole like she was campaigning. My Uncle Pete and his wife, my aunts, their husbands, a hedge of cousins, and Danny stuck at the kids' table in the den, keeping somebody's toddler out of the gravy, because in my family, that duty came for every girl eventually, like a birthday. Carol and I arrived together, and the room did that thing where the volume dips half a notch and everyone gets very interested in their roles. Nobody was rude. Rude would have been honest. Instead, I got the polite Frost, the hi honey with no eye contact, the chair that happened to be at the far end. I caught Cody's eye across the room, and he lit up and started toward me, and got steered into a seat by my mother's hand on his shoulder, smooth as traffic control. Pete stood and raised his cider and toasted family loyalty, and his eyes did a lap of the table and parked on me just long enough to be a sentence. I kept my hands in my lap. In my sweater pocket, the corner of the manila envelope pressed into my ribs when I leaned forward, like a 13th rib, and I swear I could feel my own heartbeat in the paper. Twice, pure reflex, I stood up to start clearing plates, and twice I made myself sit back down. 9 years of training doesn't come off with the coat. Then the pie went around, and my mother, warmed up and generous, decided the moment had come to tell everyone the story of me. She told it well. I'll give her that forever. She waited for a natural lull, somewhere between pumpkin and pecan, and she let my Aunt Marie hand her the opening by asking, so gently, "How are things with Fonda?" And my mother sighed the sigh of a woman being brave in public, and she said, loud enough for both leaves of the table, "We had to love her hard this fall. She chose a paycheck, and some boy over her little brothers and her sister. Broke our hearts. But we're praying she comes back to us. Some boy." She'd promoted the imaginary boyfriend to a whole reason. Around the table, heads nodded on cue, and my Aunt Marie made the tutting sound, and my father studied his mashed potatoes like they were about to be on the news. And I felt the envelope against my ribs, and I did not move, because I'd promised myself one thing on the drive over. Not while angry. I'd waited 7 weeks. I could wait one more minute. Except the next voice at that table wasn't mine, and it wasn't an adult's. It was Danny, 13 years old, parked at the kids' table in the doorway with a toddler on her knee, and she asked it the way kids ask things. No aim. All accuracy. Then why does she live with Aunt Carol? The table went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator change gears in the kitchen. 19 forks stopped. My mother's smile stayed up, but it went load-bearing, and she said, "Sweetheart, that's grown-up business." And Danny, God bless her, shrugged and said, "I'm just saying, if she ran off, how come everybody knows her address?" Somewhere down the table, a cousin snorted into a napkin. My grandmother set down her water glass with a click, and every face in that room, one by one, turned to me. I didn't stand up. I want that in the record too. Everything you've ever seen about moments like this has somebody standing, shouting, a chair scraping back. I stayed in my seat, and I took the manila envelope out of my sweater pocket, and I set it on my grandmother's white tablecloth, the one she starched for holidays and loved more than several of us, and I smoothed it flat. "Since it's come up," I said, and my voice came out level, which surprised me. I'd rather answer that with paper than with a speech. 3 things came out of the envelope. I did not editorialize. The first was a photograph, and I passed it left. "That's the front porch on October 9th, I said. "That's everything I own in one tote. That's the porch light Mom turned on so I could see it when I biked home from my shift." The photo started around the table, and I watched it change faces one at a time, like a light switch going down a hallway. The second was a printout, and I read it once, flat. No theater. "You did this to yourself. Don't come back until you remember what family means." Sent from Dad's phone, 8:16 p.m., while I was standing in the rain. My father put down his fork very carefully, like it might make a sound. The third I just laid in the middle, turned so Grandma could read it. "The school district has a legal name for what I've been since October," I said. "Unaccompanied youth. It's a federal form. My parents' names are on it, and so is the reason." Then I stopped talking, which I'd learned from Carol, and the silence did the rest of my talking. My mother stood up so fast her chair barked on the floor, and the sentence came out of her before she chose it. The family sentence, the heirloom. "The oldest carries," Denise said. "That's how it's always." "I know," I said, still sitting. I carried. I looked at her, and for once she looked away first. I thanked my grandmother for dinner, I told the kids I loved them. And I walked out of that dining room at exactly the pace a person walks when they have nothing left to run from. And behind me, the storm door clapped shut. And then there was one set of footsteps on the porch boards. The footsteps were my dad's. Ray Avery stood on his mother-in-law's porch, hands wrestling each other, and he said my name. And then he said, I should have picked the moment. I never picked the moment. His voice came apart on the second sentence, and for a moment he looked exactly like Cody at the window, and I understood something I'd been avoiding all fall. My father wasn't the co-author of my mother's story. He was its first hostage, and he'd traded me for a quieter cell. I'm sorry, he said, and I believe to this day that he meant it. So I asked him the only question that mattered. Then come inside and say that sentence at the table. He looked at the storm door. The window glowed gold, and you could hear the voices rising in there, the sides forming. Pete's wife saying, if it's not true, show me which part. My Aunt Marie saying she's always been dramatic. All he had to do was open a door in his own family. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. I can't, he said. Your mother, and then the sentence just ended, the way all his sentences about her ended, in a place with no floor. That was the night I stopped waiting for my father. And it grieved me more than the tote did, if I'm honest. The tote was her handwriting. The porch was his. Behind him, Grandma Ruth appeared at the door, small and straight as a fence post, and she didn't ask if it was true. That's what I'd braced for, and she skipped it entirely, which told me she already knew. What she said instead was, you shamed me at my table. Not them. Me. Her table. Then Carol came out with both our coats over one arm right on time, like a bell ending a round, and as we got in the car, she looked back at the golden window and said, longest anybody's ever lasted at that table is my sister. Remember that when you're hating her. Winter came down on Harlow Falls like a lid. For 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, the silence from my parents' house was total. And then my dad did the single bravest thing he ever managed, which tells you the size of the scale we were working with. He called Carol, not me, and negotiated in his trucker's logistics voice, like he was scheduling a delivery. One Saturday morning a month, he'd bring the kids to the shop. He didn't tell my mother at first. I know that because the first Saturday, he sat in the parked car the whole 2 hours like a getaway driver. But the kids came up those stairs, and Sam hit me at knee height going full speed, and Cody, 9 years old and casual as a heart attack, said the kitchen smells better here, and I taught him to flip pancakes that same morning. He burned the first one on one side, every single time, all winter. We ate them anyway. Bess read the syrup label out loud like a newscaster. For 2 hours a month, I wasn't a rumor or a warning or a line item. I was just their sister. At a table. Sticky. Then January took something back, the way January does. Mrs. Aldrich died in her sleep on a Tuesday, in room 14, with the cribbage board on her nightstand. The activities director found me on Saturday and handed me a paper bag with the board in it, because there was a sticky note in Mrs. Aldrich's handwriting on the box that said, for the pancake girl. She counts fine. I sat in the fabric storage room at Second Seam and cried for the first time since October 9th. And I mean, the first time. Porch included. Grief is like that. It waits for a door with no lock on it. When I came upstairs, Carol had left an envelope on the Formica table, thick one, lighthouse on the corner, Beacon, finalist round. The Beacon finalist interview happened in February, in a conference room in Columbus with a panel of 3, a nursing dean, a foundation officer, and a woman who never introduced herself and took notes with a fountain pen. They asked about grades, about Crestwood, about why nursing, and then the dean folded her hands and asked the question they'd clearly saved. Tell us about a time caring cost you something. I could feel the answer they were fishing for. Some tidy little essay about missing prom for a shift, and I thought about my mother, 16, braiding hair at 6 a.m., and I thought, no. If I'm going to be the one who breaks this chain, I might as well do it out loud, in a conference room, on the record. So I told them, 9 years of lunchboxes and fever nights, the flyer that felt like shoplifting, the ultimatum, the locks, the tote under the porch light, the couch over the upholstery shop. I kept my voice at dinner table level the whole way through, and I ended it the only way that felt true. I told them those 10 years were the best clinical rotation I'll ever get. They just never came with a supervisor's signature. The fountain pen stopped moving somewhere around the porch, and the dean looked at me for a second too long, and I honestly couldn't tell you if it was pity or arithmetic. 3 weeks later, the letter came. Conditional award. Full ride, contingent on graduating in good standing and reporting to the Summer Bridge residency June 1st. No deferrals. The cohort begins together, or not at all. Carol read it twice and put a second red circle around June 1st on top of the first one, hard enough to tear the page a little. For about 6 weeks, life did an impression of being simple. School, shifts, pancake Saturdays, hours adding up in Yolanda's neat attestation log. Then, on a Tuesday night in April at 11 o'clock, my phone lit up twice, 10 minutes apart. The first text was from Kayla. "I'm so sorry, but I can't do this anymore." The second was 3 gray dots, appearing and disappearing, from a number I hadn't seen on my screen since October. Mom. Here's what I pieced together later, from Bess's whispered Thursday reports, and one very tired text thread with Kayla. It had been coming apart for weeks. Kayla was 20, taking her own classes, and my parents had her doing 5 evenings a week, which is not babysitting. That's a household position with no benefits. My mother's night lead raise was mostly going out the door to pay her, which put my mother in a mood, which rolled downhill onto Kayla, who was already drowning in homework she couldn't start until midnight. In April, she quit, midweek, and she left the way overloaded people leave, all at once, kids handed to the neighbor lady at dinner time with a text of apology. And the Avery family system, the one that had run silent for 10 years on free fuel, seized up in a single evening. My mother was suddenly a night lead with no nights covered. My father was 500 miles into a run. And my phone, which had been a graveyard since Thanksgiving, came back to life like a switchboard in a flood. "Dad, call your mother, please. Uncle Pete. Family emergency kiddo. Be the bigger person." Grandma Ruth. On the actual telephone, with an actual speech. A girl who turns her back on blood. And I sat on Carol's couch and listened to all of it with the strangest feeling coming over me, and it took me a minute to name it. Cold. Every single message was about coverage, shifts, evenings, logistics, who has the kids Thursday. 5 months of silence, and when it finally broke, it didn't break with "we miss you." It broke with a staffing problem. Not one of them asked how I was. I checked twice, and I'm telling you, the word Fonda barely appears. Wednesday, I let the phone buzz itself out on Carol's counter. Thursday, I studied for a chem test. Friday afternoon, after the dinner shift I'd been picking up all spring to pad my hours, I came out of Crestwood into the parking lot, and my mother's Buick was parked next to the bike rack, engine off, and she was standing beside it, waiting for me, holding 2 cups of coffee. She'd brought me a coffee with 2 sugars, which is how I take it. And that undid me more than an apology would have, because it meant she'd always known things like that. She just kept them in storage. "Fonda," she said, and her voice had been sanded soft for the occasion. "We've all said things. Come home. Your room's exactly how you left it." And then she made the offer. And I want you to hear it exactly, because it's the center of this whole story. "We'll pay you," she said. "Whatever we were paying Kayla, you'll get the same, fair and square, every Friday. Better in your pocket than a stranger's." There it was. My mother, in a nursing home parking lot, quoting me a wage. 8 years old? Unpaid. 12 years old, unpaid. 17? Market rate, now that the market had educated her. She'd just confessed to the whole crime without hearing herself do it. They always knew it was work you pay for. They just preferred it free. And I stood there holding the coffee she'd fixed correctly, and felt something in my chest finish closing, quiet as a till drawer. And she wasn't done. "There's just the one thing," she said. "The timing. Defer the scholarship a year. Family first. Nursing school isn't going anywhere. A year. in our family. I looked at this woman, 16 once, braiding hair at 6 a.m., who had deferred herself 1 year at a time into a whole life, and I heard Mrs. Aldrich clear as a bell over her shoulder, only the love that doesn't send a bill. My mother had just sent me one, itemized, with my own bedroom as the signing bonus, and Beacon's letter said no deferrals. Whether she knew that, I've never asked. Bess had told her about my circled calendar. Kids report everything, but either way, the math came out the same. I said, "I'll give you my answer tomorrow." She smiled like the sale was closed, and then, climbing into the Buick, she set the hook the way only mothers can. "Take your time, honey. The kids ask for you every night." She saved the sharpest knife for the goodbye. She always did. That night, Bess called at bedtime, and she wasn't whispering from the school office. She was crying from the hallway closet, and she said, "Sam keeps asking when you're coming to do the steps, because the steps were mine. Bath, book, inhaler check, hall light, and no substitute ever did them in order." I told her I loved her. I told her the truth, that I didn't know yet. Then I sat at the dark kitchen table for a long time. Carol didn't come out and coach me. She did one thing. She flipped the wall calendar to June before she went to bed and left the kitchen light on over it. So the red circle hung there in the little yellow pool like a stoplight. And then it was 2 a.m, and I was sitting on the floor of the storage room next to the gray tote. 7 months at Carol's, and I had never fully unpacked it. Half my clothes still lived folded in that thing. I'd been telling myself it was organization. It wasn't. It was a bag by the door. Some part of me had been keeping myself returnable, and my mother could smell it. That's what "take your time, honey" really meant. So I made myself do the math I'd been dodging. If I went back, the kids would get me, and my parents would get proof, permanent, laminated proof, that the door only ever swings one way, that you can put a daughter on the porch in the rain and she'll come back if you price her right. And in 10 years the tote on the porch would be Bess's, because why wouldn't it be? The system worked. And if I stayed gone, the kids got a worse Tuesday, and a sister who proved it was survivable. I heard Carol's staple gun in my head. Pop, pop. You are allowed to cost something. I was never the glue in that house. I was the excuse. As long as I held it up, nobody in it ever had to learn to stand. I didn't text my mother an answer. In the morning, I put the folder in my bike basket and rode to the house I grew up in. Saturday morning, October 9th in reverse. I biked the 15 minutes with the manila folder bungeed flat in the basket, and I knocked on my own front door like a census taker, and it was strange which detail got me. My chair at the kitchen table, my spot for 17 years, had a stack of unopened mail sitting on it. They hadn't replaced me. They'd just let the mail pile up where I used to be. My mother put out coffee, hostess warm, already talking, and my father stood against the sink with his arms crossed, looking at the floor tile he'd looked at his whole marriage. She had the schedule half planned before I sat down. "You'll want Tuesdays off probably? We'll be flexible." Family flexes. I let her finish. 9 years of training, you learn to let the shift supervisor finish. Then I said it. One time. Level. "I'm not coming back. Mom, I'm not the babysitter. I was never supposed to be." She started to answer, and I did the thing I'd biked over to do. Instead of arguing, I slid the folder across the table and paper beat speech for the second time in one winter. She opened it because a folder demands opening. On top, the YMCA after-school program. 2 spots. And here's what I'd done the day before. I'd called Miss Reyes at the branch and had both kids moved off the wait list and penciled in, under my mother's name, pending one signature and a sliding scale form I'd already flagged with a sticky arrow. Under that, the county subsidy tables with their income bracket highlighted. They qualified. They'd qualified for 2 years. Nobody in that house had ever looked. Under that, the shift swap policy from my dad's carrier, the home nightly routes, the paragraph highlighted. "And Dad," I said. And he finally looked up. "Drivers senior to you swap onto home nightly every spring." I checked the seniority list dates. "You've qualified since March." Under that, 2 sitter numbers from Carol's church, vetted grandmothers who actually like children, and last. Laminated because I know my people. Sam's steps, bath, book, inhaler, hall light. In my handwriting, the index cards come back. I told you they would. You don't need a daughter back, I said. You need a system. There's the system. It cost me one winter to build, and it doesn't cost anybody their life. My mother looked at the folder, and then she did the only thing left in the drawer. She went for the heirloom. Voice cracking. Standing now. The oldest carries, Fonda. That's how it's always. Then it ends with me, I said. Not loud. I've heard bones break louder than I said that sentence. I stood, pushed my chair in, out of habit, moved the mail off it first, also habit, and told them the terms. One Saturday a month, pancakes at Carol's. I take all 3 kids. That's not for you two. That's for them. And it's not negotiable. Then I walked out through the living room, past the couch I'd folded 10,000 tiny shirts on, and as I hit the walk, I heard the storm door open behind me and Sam's voice, and I turned. And my mother was holding him back on the threshold, and he had his whole hand pressed flat against the glass. I raised my hand and held it up, level with his, 15 feet of morning air between us. And then I got on my bike, and I rode to Carol's, and I did not look back. Because if I had, I'd still be standing there. The Beacon acceptance packet was on the Formica table where I'd left it that morning, on purpose, so there'd be something waiting on the other side of that kitchen. I signed every line at Carol's table with her good pen, and Carol signed the guardian acknowledgement underneath, and neither of us said anything ceremonial, because some tables have heard enough speeches. Then I went down to the storage room and I unpacked the tote. All the way, for the first time, 7 months of half-living reversed in 20 minutes. Winter coat on a hanger. Books on the shelf Carol had cleared back in October, which had been sitting empty all this time, waiting for me to believe her. When it was done, I popped the plastic latches, folded that gray tote flat, and slid it on top of the cabinet, and it made a sound like something ending. In May, I turned 18 with a cake from the day-old rack, doctored by Bess with a full bottle of sprinkles at Pancake a Saturday. In June, first, graduation, folding chairs, a gym that smelled like floor wax. In my cheering section, Carol, Mrs. Tellman, and Yolanda, who closed the dining room an hour early and dared anyone to complain. And in the very back, by the doors, my father, alone, in his good shirt. He clapped until his hands must have hurt, and he left before the last name was called, and that was the whole conversation. June 1st, Carol drove me to campus with the kitchen calendar rolled up in my duffel like a diploma, red circle and all. Here's the part nobody in my family predicted, including me. The system worked. A year later, I was through my first year of the nursing program, tuition paid, housing paid, books paid, and Pancake Saturday had a permanent slot on everybody's calendar. Cody flipped the pancakes now, still burned the first one on one side, we suspect on purpose, for tradition. Bess read the syrup label to Sam in her newscaster voice, and Sam did the inhaler steps himself, in order, out loud, like a countdown. Mrs. Aldrich's cribbage board lived on Carol's table, and Cody was learning to peg. And the folder? The one I slid across that kitchen table? Every page of it got used. The kids went to the YMCA program. Subsidy approved. My dad took a home nightly route in the spring swap. First time in 15 years he saw a Tuesday dinner. My mother came off nights and back to day shift. Gave up the title she'd traded me for. And I won't pretend that doesn't have a taste. On my 19th birthday, a card came to Carol's, my mother's handwriting, cramped and careful. No apology in it. What it said was, "The kids are fine. I didn't know how much you did." I read it maybe 30 times, same as a text on a porch once, and then I clipped it to the mirror next to my first pay stub. Carol asked if that meant I'd forgiven her. I said no, it meant I had evidence, and we left it there. They don't try to force me back anymore. They ask now. There's a difference. And the difference is the whole war. My mother asks if I'm coming for Christmas. Asks. The word please has entered her vocabulary like a foreign coin she's still learning the value of. Some doors stay propped like that for years. Not open, not shut. and you learn to stop standing in the draft. I'm told that's what healing looks like in families like mine. Slower than the movies. Paperwork instead of a hug in the rain. I'll take it. Paperwork holds. That same spring, a few weeks before the birthday card came, my grandmother called me herself, and her version of a peace treaty was one clipped voicemail. Come Sunday. No speeches. So I went, on my own terms, 2 hours, my own car door to walk out of whenever I chose, which it turns out is the only way I can love some people. And there, in the doorway of the den, was Danny, 14 now, a toddler cousin parked on her hip, and a tray of deviled eggs balanced on her free arm, because the duty had come for her right on schedule, like a birthday. Nobody had asked her. Nobody ever asks. They just hand you things until you're a shelf. I pulled a chair next to her, took the tray out of her hand, set a plate of food in front of her. Her own plate. First serving, still warm, and while the den TV hollered about basketball, I gave her the only inheritance I had. You are allowed to cost something, I told her. She looked at me sideways, half a kid, half something waking up, and she said, "That's a weird thing to say," and went back to her eggs. That's fine. It was weird when Carol said it to me too. Seeds don't have to make sense on the day you plant them. 12 years and 1 nursing degree later, here's the one thing I know for certain. Love that has to be paid for isn't love. It's rent. And the day I stopped paying rent on a room they never planned to let me keep was the day I finally got a home. That's my story. 1 plastic tote. 1 red circle on a kitchen calendar. 1 folder that did my old job better than my whole childhood did. If you were the oldest who carried, hear me. You're allowed to cost something. If this story found you at the right time, share it with the one who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.